Welcome, boys and girls. Costin here with a discussion about the Warriors of Chaos in Lords of End Times. Glotkin is going to be coming out for the Warriors of Chaos. I think it makes sense from a lore perspective, given how they were tied to Archaon during those events. But also from a gameplay and development standpoint, I think Crave Assembly's perspective on the subject matter is, well, we are going to do End Times, so that means we want to do something for Archaon, which means revisiting Warriors of Chaos. And since Glotkin are tied to Archaon, why not just put them as Warriors of Chaos? So they have talked about before cross-race confederation. I think one of the ideas people have talked about often enough is this notion that you should be able to choose which race you're playing as. I think, as sensible as it is for Glotkin to be Warriors of Chaos, I also think Tamarkan should be Warriors of Chaos, considering the mechanics that Warriors of Chaos have versus Nurgle. Like the whole chieftain mechanic, leveling chieftains, etc., makes more sense within a Warriors of Chaos campaign than a Nurgle campaign. There's also the discussion to be had on the subject that Nurgle could definitely use some improvements beyond what they already got with Thrones of Decay. So that is one perspective I do have on that subject. It will be interesting to see where they fit in Glotkin, because if you haven't noticed, the map is kind of crowded already. I mean, there are some opportunities, but if you're looking at Glotkin, you're definitely going to be looking at a campaign where you're going to want them to be somewhere in the Empire. And with Boris becoming a playable campaign, that is definitely going to make this area crowded, especially if, if they put Glotkin anywhere close enough to the Empire. Who knows? Maybe they do put Glotkin far away. But let's talk about Warriors of Chaos and the things that work, as well as the things that I believe Crave Assembly should work on improving for this particular race. One of the great things about Warriors of Chaos is the entire Warband upgrade system, because it not only allows you to recruit an army of units and then preserve those units throughout the course of a campaign, which is certainly a better system than what we have by default, because one of the problems we have with regular recruitment is that due to the pacing of the game, you start a campaign, right? And then you gain experience for your units, but then eventually you have this decision. Do I replace these units with better units, even though they're, in many cases, they're just slightly better? Like you're looking at Jade Warriors, Jade Warrior crossbowmen with shields versus regular Jade Warrior crossbowmen. Yeah, it's not necessarily that much of a difference, especially when you're counting the experience aspect. And since the game is so front heavy in terms of its difficulty, though that is likely to change with the endgame crises they are doing in End Times, then certainly this creates a system where using Warband upgrades does allow you to create armies that really feel your own. The downside, of course, with the system is that you're limited in terms of recruitment. There are several reasons why. One of these is actually money. So Warriors of Chaos do not generate enough income, at least early on, to maintain a lot of armies. Sure, later on, you're drowning in cash. That's a common thing across every single campaign in the game, and it takes a really bad legendary lord, looking at you, Daniel, to not be able to afford more than a couple of armies after the end game. But it's really the early game situation that kind of creates a problem. So you have limitations on recruitment, because you can only recruit through the Warband recruitment system. Whereas I think the Warband upgrade system is great, the Warband recruitment system should probably not be the principal recruitment system that you have in your campaign. What some mods do in order to improve the situation is they allow you, instead of, providing local Warband unit capacity over here for these unit recruitment buildings, what some mods like Radius, for example, they allow you to just flat recruit units from your Dark Fortresses. You still have an incentive to use Warband recruitment because, one, it doesn't require the structure. Secondly, it's you can recruit a lot of units very quickly as opposed to having to wait for it. So there's still upsides to using it, but you still have regular recruitment. And that's kind of one of the problems that Warriors of Chaos do struggle on, that lack of regular unit recruitment. And we're not just talking here about the player either. We're also talking here about the AI. So the problem that does exist with Warriors of Chaos is their AI is just not really competent, and they're not using this system. Hopefully, one of the big changes that will be implemented with Lords of the End Times as part of Warriors of Chaos rework, which I assume is coming alongside that, is that the AI of Warriors of Chaos will finally be able to properly use the Warband upgrade and recruitment system. Hopefully. But I wouldn't keep my fingers crossed on that. Suffice to say, however, mods already do that, so I don't think it should be a reason. There should be a reason for Creative Assembly not to go down that path. Now, that's one of those aspects. So, like the Warband upgrade system, great system. The Warband recruitment system just being the only way to recruit units, not exactly ideal. Another thing to be talked about is the Dark Fortresses themselves. I think having certain strategic settlements that you control is great, but only having those settlements as proper settlements and relying on vassals to hold everything else, or just getting minor settlements that are at best used for a couple of very minor benefits and some trade resources, is not ideal. It especially hurts you in terms of your growth potential, because a lot of the growth that you get in your settlements is ultimately tied to the settlements you control in a province. I mean, the Brass Keep in particular, even if minor settlements did give you more growth, the fact that it's a single settlement right here in the Middle Mountains, it does create its own issues in terms of growing it. Again, some mods do handle this much better, and while it doesn't hurt Warriors of Chaos as much as other races, because the only thing really you're going to miss out is like, oh, you don't have the same kind of Warband unit capacity. I mean, you can get plenty of these units, and they do have a tendency to show up. Like, I've seen Dragon Ogres all over the place. I'm not quite sure to what it's tied to. It does bring up the question of, like, how are they going to change corruption, if in any way, shape, or form. They've talked about Undead Wasteland corruption, but still, it is a question, like, is corruption going to work differently? And will Archaon's helm finally be fixed properly over here? I mean, we know he's going to get the model update with regards to that. Then we should talk about, like, the individuality of your lords and heroes. So you have undivided and dedicated lords and heroes of chaos. In theory, again, this is a great deal of customization, but on the flip side, it kind of gets to a point where when you're juggling so many things between boons of chaos, marks of chaos, so different dedication, then you're also having to juggle authority at the same time. Like, it's okay for a couple of armies, but eventually, you know, as you gain more and more heroes, and even for Warriors of Chaos, you will gain more and more armies, you will gain more and more heroes. It does kind of end up being annoying. So it's one of those systems where it's fine or acceptable enough as it is early on, but becomes something of a hassle later on. Beyond that, of course, we do have a research tree that I think should be potentially upgraded. I think Amazon's actually handled locking units behind certain upgrades better. So with Amazons, you needed structures. You can just get high-end units just by getting the experience on them. You actually needed to get the structures for those units to unlock those units in order to be able to recruit them. With Warriors of Chaos, it's tied to research. So it's either annoying or realistically, it's mostly irrelevant, to be quite honest on this, because you just have... You literally, okay, so you get profane weaponry, which gives you chosen, right? So you get which gives you cast knights, and then other things just kind of like a lot of other things are not really that great with regards to all of this, because, like, you know, 7 turns get chosen is yeah, who's gonna care? But spending multiple turns to, say, for instance, get Forsaken, not an ideal situation. And it's kind of even worse with regards to what's worse. Like, this is just a most an annoyance, but what's actually worse is with regards to the brands. So if you want a dedicated army of Tzeentch or of Khorne or of Nurgle, unless you're playing the Mono God factions, you have to spend over a dozen turns researching it. And that's ignoring also the fact that you also, putting aside the fact that it does, that you might start researching down a particular path, like why wouldn't you get Rites of Ascension and Profane Weaponry, and then just, okay, we're going to go Tzeentch and we're going to go Nurgle, as opposed to wasting your time, for instance, or not really a waste of time, but you get the idea. And also similar situation with the Gifts of Chaos, which do affect, give you some substantial benefits in your campaign. Again, if you're playing a Mono God, you do get a Gifts of Chaos for your Mono God and Undivided Gifts, but if you're looking at Kholek and you're looking at Archaon, getting these gifts takes a good amount of time, just a single one, because let's say, for instance, I want to get the gift of Nurgle, which is pretty important. It takes 21 turns in my campaign. That's not too bad, but when you think of the fact that Festus and Be'lakor also start with these Gifts of Chaos, then that kind of creates something of a balance issue between the Legendary Lords, and that's perhaps the biggest problem of Warriors of Chaos. They have a lot of Legendary Lords, but there's not really unique mechanics between them. Sure, they are stealing some mechanics, like, Azazel has some mechanics from Slaanesh, the Nurgle factions have, or Festus has the Plagues. It's kind of funny when you think about it. Like, Festus is genuinely the best Nurgle campaign from the perspective of a lot of things, really, but he's the best from the point of view of being able to actually use the Plagues of Nurgle, and also not having the same limitations on recruitment. Because even though, yes, you don't have to level up your units normally when you're playing a Nurgle campaign, you do have the limitation of waiting for cycles, whereas Festus is just like, I'm going to recruit units, right? And yes, he has to upgrade them, but keep in mind that the limitation with cycles just really creates a better situation for him. And then there's, of course, Be'lakor, because this is where things get ridiculous. Sure, Be'lakor may not have Bloodletting, may not have the Plagues of Nurgle, and a couple of other things, but what he does have, and what Archaon can get, is so ridiculously above everyone else that you essentially end up with a situation where some Legendary Lords of Warriors of Chaos are just flat out superior than others. Like, there's campaigns of Warriors of Chaos that are simply not worth playing because, well, I can play this Lord, like Village, but I can play a much better Lord that can also gain control of Village and has a better roster and better mechanics. And that's really the essence of Be'lakor. Like, what's the point in owning Warriors of Chaos, either the DLC or Champions of Chaos, when Be'lakor, who's available to everyone, by the way, just does things better, and that's not even funny. So, first off, one of the significant advantages he has, even if you own the DLC, like, if you own the DLC, you might think, oh, okay, let's try these guys out. Well, if you're playing Be'lakor, you can force a confederation on the other Legendary Lords. All of them. Like, you can get Valkia, you can get Sigvald, you can get Archaon. The only other one that can do so is Archaon himself, makes sense. But even then, Be'lakor does have an advantage in terms of his mechanics compared to the others. And not a small way either. So, he has two vassals, and that's its own discussion. Whether or not Warriors of Chaos should play around this idea of limited armies, limited direct settlement control, but a lot of vassals, or they should have a more direct approach. I think a balance between the two would be good, not just like, oh, get a lot of vassals, that's beneficial. It's money, it's armies that help you out, that you don't pay for military supplies, for supply lines, and And also the vassal system in itself makes things ridiculous. So yeah, Be'lakor just being able to confederate other ones and implicitly getting their vassals as well is pretty damn ridiculous. You add to that Warriors of Chaos have all the climate available in the game, then you kind of start seeing the steamroll. Though it's not necessarily a really fun steamroll from that perspective, because again, it's like just... you have to level up individual armies, few people can stand up in your path, so it's just like you're kind of playing whack-a-mole. You're spending more time in your campaign just trying to get the right vassalization by capturing the last settlement. And maybe that is the big point that Creative Assembly should think about. Vassalization and diplomacy in general should not be about abusing things, which, by the way, it is. And it's always been like that in Total War. It should be more about the gradual buildup of a relationship between factions. But either the way it's worked in Total War history is either things don't work, or things are broken, or more often than not, both at the same time. But yeah, Be'lakor's ability to confederate other factions, as well as his starting location, which gives him a good amount of potential in terms of vassalization, and the fact he starts with 2 vassals is ridiculous. But then you add on top of that the fact that he has the ability through the Cursor's boon to open portals around the world that only he can use, then you kind of understand why this guy is ridiculous. Oh, you want to pick up the Sword of Cain as Be'lakor? No problem. Oh, you want to confederate this faction or that faction or force the vassalization someone else without really risking anything because your core territory is an island that no one is going to attack? You can do so. And look, I'm not talking here from the perspective of like, oh, it's a steamroll campaign. There's a lot of steamroll campaigns, but some can be fun. Like Arbol is a real fun experience, but it's just, you risk something if you bite off more than you can chew as Arbol, right? Because you might as well quit the campaign if you lose a battle with him. Whereas with Warriors of Chaos, you risk very little. Enemies are not going to attack dark fortresses because they're very powerful garrisons, and their positions in general make them very unappealing for the AI to attack. Rarely do I see the AI attacking dark fortresses, though who knows, maybe with the campaign AI changes that came out today, that will be different. I have to test that out. But regardless. And the final thing that makes Be'lakor so ridiculously over the top, and this is, you know, these are the kind of things that in general Creative Assembly should look at with balance, is with the Gifts of Chaos. So Be'lakor starts with 1 slot of each gift unlocked. So obviously you can get 2, but when you're playing Be'lakor, having 1 of each is a significant advantage, and it creates a more varied and interesting campaign experience as well, because these gifts are not just campaign benefits, they're different unit types. You know, getting Seeker Chariots, for instance, if you want to, or starting working on Siege to, you know, get Lord of Change, Mutalisk, all those kind of wonderful things, including Changebringers. Yeah, that's a freaking awesome unit. So you have more variety, and also Be'lakor is not limited in terms of the gifted units he can have per army. I understand that they wanted to make him a Demon Warrior of Chaos faction, but it is one of those situations like, whatever, if the few limitations that Warriors of Chaos have, like limitations on gifted units, so you can't just use souls to fill up an army instantly. Well, you can, but all the same, you can't just fill it up with gifted units. No limitations on gifts. Sure, you don't have as you can't be as powerful as Archaon becomes later on, but that's kind of not relevant in a campaign, because by the time you get to a point where Archaon is even equal to Be'lakor, your campaign is over. And that's perhaps the biggest issue that Creative Assembly should tackle with Warriors of Chaos. See, due to the way things are designed, the fact that dark fortresses are the primary way you earn money, the vassalization situation, the confederation situation is if you're playing Be'lakor and Archaon, then you actually don't spend your campaign at all fighting the forces of order. You're heavily incentivized to fight chaos. And maybe that's something that should be different. Maybe a system where, you know, if you fight order, other chaos factions are willing to become your vassals from a distance. Like we have guaranteed confederation with factions, like you look at the dwarves, for instance, or high elves. But maybe a system like that would be in order for Warriors of Chaos. Like, yes, you could have confederations done from distance, but imagine also just all of the Chaos Tide factions joining forces to attack the Order Tide factions and kind of creating a more dynamic endgame scenario as opposed to a scripted one, you know, where you have that clash between the Order Tide and the Chaos Tide, as opposed to you just spending your entire campaign conquering Chaos and then just like, okay, I can destroy Altdorf right now, but do I really care for it? Or I could just AFK and press the enter button and let my vassals do all the work if I have enough of them. So I think that's the kind of gameplay loop that Creative Assembly should really look at in order to improve things along. Also, it's kind of ridiculous to mention, like, Archaon gains a passive amount of souls, and yes, his faction effects and lord effects should be changed, maybe at least his faction effects, and he does need unique faction mechanics. Though I do feel like, as of late, Creative Assembly's idea of unique campaign mechanics has left something to be desired. Like, look, Bashiva is awesome as a character design, but I'm not gonna say that I'm impressed by her campaign design because... or the unique mechanics. It's just kind of busy work, so I hope that's not what Archaon's campaign is going to turn into. But we'll find out. That's all I had to say. Costin signing out. I am really curious to see what they're going to do with Glotkin. Sure, they showed up units, but what I personally really want to see is campaign mechanics, starting position, all that kind of stuff. We'll find out. Costin signing out.